Yes, so the Theranos comparison is the first place that everybody goes, and why there's so many parallels between, what we did and what we do here at Karius specifically and Theranos. So our founders also from Stanford University, that technology, being linked to that, a Silicon Valley company, a young company in the blood sample space, in the diagnostic space. So I'll tell you though, before I knew that things were wrong, I was another one like everybody else. We didn't realize that Theranos was not ethically doing the right things or communicating effectively. I was super jealous. I'm like, what? This was this was a great PR machine.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
I am a creative by nature. I'm sure many of you listening are as well. Marketing attracts creatives. Being a creative is necessary to craft breakthrough marketing. However, come on, let's admit it, there are weaknesses as well. One of them is we get bored easily. I was reminded of this when reading the following lesson in a podcast guest application: the power of the story and the importance of repetition. What a perfect combination, showing the dichotomy of being a creative marketer. We need that creativity to craft a powerful story, and yet we need to remember that the customer will never see the message as often as we do. They are not nearly as focused on our brand. So we as marketers can't get bored so easily. Repetition is crucial. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Laura Ayala, Vice President of Marketing and Customer Experience at Karius. Thanks for joining us, Laura.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm a big fan. Thank you for making all that material for us marketers. And really excited to be here.
Well, thanks so much, Laura. You made my day. Let's take a look at your background. Just cherry picking here. Undergraduate degree was in neuroscience and started your career as a project manager at Becton Dickinson. You went to get your MBA from Berkeley and moved into biotech marketing, and now are the Vice President of Marketing and Customer Experience at Karius. Karius has most recently raised $165 million from a Series B funding round led by Softbank's Vision Fund 2 and $255 million funding in total. Is one of Forbes' top 50 most promising AI firms. And again, it's a healthcare AI. Really has nothing to do with marketing. But you have a marketing role, a marketing and customer experience role, where you manage a team of 12 in marketing and customer success, as well as 5 agencies. So tell us, Laura, what is your day like as Vice President of Marketing and Customer Experience at Karius, working with that team of 12, working with those agencies?
Well, Daniel, the first thing I'm going to say is that it's a lot of fun. It's very engaging, especially in a startup environment and marketing. It's very diverse, right? So day to day, I'm dealing between, is this content in this piece of collateral really accurate and relevant to the customer, to we're having a big show, to, are the ads running the way they need to be running in digital? And then on the customer success angle, we in healthcare deal with very pressing problems, right? We need to make sure that we're there for our clinicians, that we're there for our patients, delivering on time. So there's no minute here where I'm bored or anything. If anything, I'm engaged all the time, working with a great team. These startups are absolutely, I think, the best place to be if you really want every minute of your life to be busy.
I love that the first thing you said is fun, because I interviewed the CMO of On the Border Mexican Cantina, and she had just a career of working at fun type of brands like that, like a Mexican cantina, And so to hear you talk about that in healthcare marketing, which healthcare is like just so crucial, I love that you're having fun there as well. That's awesome.
Oh, yes. I think marketing, no matter which industry, like you said at the beginning, needs to be very creative. So you need to be creative. And that doesn't mean just colors, right? Just means how are you effectively going to communicate something very important to people? And that's why I believe in that power of the story, that you need to constantly be iterating, thinking, creating And the newer the product is, in our case, the newer the category, then yeah, that's what I think it's fun. But you're right, maybe not everybody thinks it's fun.
Well, me and you do, so that's important. And I'm sure our audience of marketers does as well. Well, and let's take a look at some of the things you've learned in your career and what we can learn from it as well and the stories behind it. First, you say there is no room for error in healthcare marketing. So how did you learn that?
Definitely. Look, I put myself in the shoes of these doctors, these patients. I've been a patient myself. You know, you probably can relate. I think everybody, right? At least a family member. Unfortunately, right, being hospitalized. And what really matters when you're there, and in our current product, our customer is this patient who's in the hospital suffering from infectious disease, then you know that it's very important that the patient gets the best care possible. And it's people like me, you know, my entire teams who want to make sure that these doctors have the right information to make the best decision possible. Of course, you know, this is not a perfect world, but that's what I mean with no room for error. Let's just ensure that the most accurate information is being delivered so that this doctor has everything on their hand to really do the best for this patient. And then when you're a patient yourself, you also feel better, right? That this is the best care you're receiving. And I think everybody in the industry tries to do that. And that's what I mean for no room for error. These decisions are life, right, or death at somebody's hand. So we feel very responsible to ensure that it's as accurate as possible.
Well, something interesting, really interesting that you said that you can actually scare doctors by talking about new products and novel and things like this. And that is so kind of counterintuitive to most of us marketers, right? New and improved, powerful words. So I kind of wonder, like, how do you learn that or how you get that messaging right? You know, experimentation is so baked into healthcare itself, right? Do you conduct any experimentation with your marketing, with your messaging to figure that out? So, for example, I once interviewed a healthcare marketer from the stage at one of our events, and they were conducting experimentation on their pages. They found out, you know, you always hear short copy works better. They found out they needed a really long page that worked better. And then when they took that at 140 local clinics, they took that from that one site, rolled it off out to those 140 local clinics, they were able to get 220% more conversions, which is more people, you know, signing up for their clinic. So I wonder, when you're talking about that, I mean, I love that lesson, new and novel, that's not necessarily great in healthcare. You don't want to scare the doctors, like, but how do you find out, you know, that nuance to get that right messaging? A/B testing, experimentation, like, are you experimenting like these healthcare practitioners are?
Oh, yes, we also need to experiment, absolutely. But let me take it a step back to provide a little more context of why this novel message is a little bit more challenging in healthcare, right? Because it's very different from marketing, for example, an iPhone and get very excited, right, about something that's super new. I talk about that with my friends often in tech. So to take a step back, and especially in this new category of product, because what we have here, I mean, my current job at Karius is a groundbreaking in medicine, what we call a liquid biopsy for infectious disease. So what that means is that with a sample of blood, we're able to detect over 1,000 of these pathogens that might be making somebody sick. We will return the one or two, right, that we think is the culprit. It is groundbreaking because the technology in DNA took a while to get here. You see this technology, though, in cancer, right? Screening the blood versus, say, for example, a biopsy. So the liquid element is that this is in the blood as a liquid versus going invasively to take a sample of the tumor or to take a sample of that infected tissue. Conveying newness in healthcare is a double-edged sword. First, because everybody gets super excited about technology, even in healthcare. And having worked with these world-class scientists and having done this at Karius and my prior companies, everybody here is a little bit, in a way, like, you know, geeky. I work in Silicon Valley. I myself, like you said, I have a background in neuroscience. Science was my very early love, you know, in school. And so everybody gets just super excited, like, yeah, we're, you know, doing this and that and the DNA. However, right, at the end of the day, what does this mean for the patient? And what is important for marketing and healthcare is not so much to present the excitement about the technology. Does that matter? Absolutely. But that's sort of the backstory and what makes us in tech and science super excited. But at the doctor side, at the patient side, what really matters is what does this mean for improving the care. And so when we go out with something very new, the first question is, has this been really well vetted? We're very familiar with software releases, right? Oh, wait, it was buggy. Oh, wait, that didn't work. But we've accepted that, right? It's okay. Actually, there's a special website to submit the bugs and help us improve it. So everybody understands that with new, that there are some gaps. And that is what wasn't obvious to me actually early in my career in healthcare. At first I went out with a bang, like, oh, this is new, this is exciting, everybody join us. But everybody else knew that new meant it was not perfect yet. It's version 1, right? It's version 0 is MVP. So what then I've learned is to communicate trust. Healthcare it's great that it's new, but let's supply the data that accompanies that. And you actually now, I think most of the public sees that more clearly via COVID, right? The vaccines rolling out, everyone wanted to see that these vaccines have been tested in thousands of patients, right? And so that's what I think the challenge is. But if in marketing and healthcare, you're able to provide both, this is exciting, but this is how much this was vetted, and this is really ready for you, I think that makes it more effective.
Yeah, when you said MVP, if people aren't familiar, that's minimum viable product. So that makes a lot of sense, like you said, for software where it doesn't work, we see the downtime indicators, whatever, but boy, we don't want that on our grandma or on ourselves, right? When it's a treatment.
No, exactly.
That's scary. New can be scary.
Yes. So then experimentation, right? Going to your specific question on that, we are going to experiment, but not at the product level, right? That has been very well vetted. You're right. We will experiment at the messaging level. And this brings me to another challenging aspect, but I also welcome it in healthcare, which is that balance between being very thorough versus being very effective in communication. An example about that I also talked to my other colleagues about who aren't in healthcare, but maybe consumer products is the following. Say, takes a brand like Sprite and their tagline, quench your thirst. In healthcare, we debate this shorthand way of communicating quite a bit with the teams here internally, with medical, with legal, regulatory. Quench your thirst for us would mean something like this. If you're thirsty, being defined as your throat is a little bit scratchy, your mouth is dry, then if you take 3 gulps of this drink, we think that you might perhaps relieve your thirst, but also you need to check afterwards. And if you're still thirsty, drink water. And so that would be the most thorough way to communicate about something. But is anybody going to read it? Is anybody, right, going to spend time? Well, at the end of the day, even in healthcare, clinicians, patients, they're humans. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of noise. Everybody needs that succinct, effective message. And so this balance between providing the sufficient information to be accurate, but succinct and lay language enough to be effective in communication is what we need to address. And that's what we experiment with. So what was the most concise way to communicate something that was effective? So we told with that quite a bit.
Well, and that brings up, I want to ask you specifically about Theranos, I don't even know how to say it. And,
yes.
Because when I saw your lesson, strike a balance between thoroughness and effectiveness, I thought of that example. And so people, I think everyone listening to this podcast would probably be familiar, but if you're not, Theranos was a healthcare startup that could supposedly test your blood with just a few drops of blood. It was led by Elizabeth Holmes, who I believe now has been convicted of fraud and all those things. But specifically, here's one thing I remember from that story where I asked you. So I saw it was Netflix or Hulu or someone made a story about it. I don't remember who. And in one part, I think she's on a yacht with Larry Ellison, and Larry Ellison is kind of telling her to be more daring or whatever. And when we were talking this pre-call, you mentioned your headquarters. You're located in Redwood City. You can see Oracle's, headquarters. You can see the yachts and stuff. And as you mentioned, Silicon Valley has that kind of startup mentality, that move fast and break things. right? So how did you bring into healthcare? How did you overcome that Theranos story? Because when I heard about Karius too, that's the first thing I thought, AI and liquid biopsy and drops of blood. How did you overcome that with your marketing messaging to say, okay, like, no, here's the thoroughness and, effectiveness part. Like, this is legitimate. Just because we're in Silicon Valley doesn't mean we're a move fast and break things type of place.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is so interesting, Daniel. And now I'm never going to forget, you're right, that lesson about the yacht is about Theranos and doing the right thing and not the wrong thing instead of thinking that it's about Oracle. So I do pass that on my commute to the office, like you said. Yes, so the Theranos comparison is the first place that everybody goes, and why there's so many parallels between, what we did and what we do here at Karius specifically and Theranos. So our founders also from Stanford University, that technology, being linked to that, a Silicon Valley company, a young company in the blood sample space, in the diagnostic space. So I'll tell you though, before I knew that things were wrong, I was another one, like everybody else. We didn't realize that Theranos is not ethically doing the right things or communicating effectively. I was super jealous. I'm like, what? This was this was a great PR machine. This founder was everywhere. The valuation was crazy, right? $1 billion. She was in the cover of magazines. If anything, what I was thinking is I need to supply my application to this company. There's a lot to learn. And when it came crashing, right, then I realized, oh my gosh, this was too good to be true. There's been no other healthcare company that I can think of that had that ability to propel to the top in the news cycle with the founder on cover of magazines, right? We think here about Together, what other healthcare company can you mention with that coverage? And it was very sad, actually. It was very disappointing that it was all fake news. And then he brought all of us in healthcare marketing back to sort of, okay, we're not the most exciting thing to be talked about on the front cover of magazines, but we're doing the right thing. And what is the right thing? The right thing was being very transparent about everything that we worked on. And Karius, because of Theranos, then, and also my job has been with the teams here, with my teams, to ensure that transparency. So we have, over 100 of these publications. Well, we make sure they're on the website, right? We enlist our customers to tell us what is working about a product, what is not working. We message on this. In our industry, it's called diagnostic stewardship. And I've thought here with another colleague of mine, Sivan Verkabishi, who is our Chief Technology Officer. What we think we're doing here, and Alec Ford, our CEO, is marketing stewardship. The responsibility to ensure that our product is adopted responsibly, that our doctors have the right information to get to the right patient at the right time with our test. Our test is not for everybody. It's not, to save the world like these other companies were promoting. It is to be decided by the clinician, and that's what we're really trying to do. But boy, that was, that did a number for all of us. I have more work now after Theranos.
Well, I don't see you wearing a black turtleneck or like your hair pulled back. Glad you didn't mimic the Elizabeth Holmes look and everything. So transparency. It's really interesting. So you mentioned artificial intelligence, AI, is a key part of your tool. So to me, and this is my, I'm a neophyte when it comes to AI. It seems like AI is the opposite of transparency, right? It seems to be, it's all these secret algorithms or neural networks or machine learning that, when you try to dig under it with a company, they're like, oh, don't worry. Input AI, output, it all works, and you don't understand. So how do you bring transparency into that element, the artificial intelligence element of your technology? Because the one thing with Theranos, which I think would be similar to yours, is that was a blood test. So people would go to see and make sure they were healthy and get those results, and they really relied on those results. And yours with the liquid biopsy, again, I would assume too, they're really relying on whatever the AI is saying, if they have cancer or not, or whatever is coming from the biopsy. So how do you meld transparency and marketing the artificial intelligence element of your technology?
Yes, I realize that AI is a little bit of a black box to everybody,
Yes.
right? A lot of stuff happening in the background. Who knows what this is?
Yes.
However, though, what really matters is for us is a step beyond that, right? Not so much what's happening in the lab and in these computational algorithms, but the data about when a patient was diagnosed with our product, what happened, what didn't happen, what did we catch, what did we miss. So it's more about transparency on how the product performed versus how the product was put together. And in medicine, that's what people look for, right? So, for example, we can go on and on about how the mRNA vaccines work for COVID and trying to understand that. But no, what really people care about is how they, worked in patients. For AI, equally fascinated. But look, we're an open door. I'm not the expert here to go into the nitty gritty, but our team here, our AI team, very happy to talk about all the technology behind it so that it's not this mysterious thing. That's not what we want. What AI does for us is put together, it's really amazing actually, all these data points, there are millions of them, in a way that this DNA, right, producing all these data can be stitched together and then revealed to the patient. It is this DNA of this pathogen that might be making you sick. So hopefully that, offers an insight into this shouldn't be that mysterious, but you will need really advanced degrees to really get to the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Well, I think, I've worked in technology earlier in my career with software companies, like we were talking about at the beginning of the call. And one of those biggest challenges is taking that complex. Like when I would get on a call with some of the technology folks and product development folks, the engineers, taking that complex of what the thing does, but then communicating it to the point in a business term where it makes sense until it gets to an actual solution. And this kind of gets into our next lesson here. You said there is value in persistence, grit, and sticking to your convictions. And you're talking about and I guess maybe with the team, came up with a word to describe it or a group of words, right? Crafting those words. And those words are not going to happen instantly. You really got to stick with them to get through to the market, to get through to people, to have them understand this. So first of all, tell us what those words are, but then how did you do that? And how did you come up with those words?
Yes. So, marketers, we're going to relate. We're mostly working on marketing new products, new things, right? Then the next level to that is the new category of products, which is what I've been working on for the last decade or so. What you call something is up to you, and it's a big deal, right? The category, not just the product itself. So I know a lot of thought is put behind that by us marketers, right? We talk to customers. We're here in the team brainstorming sessions. And I've done this a few times, before Karius, I worked in another diagnostic company, cardiovascular disease, in the rejection of transplanted organs, for example, for heart. And in that test, the novelty was that we were reading the expression of the genes, right, in patients of this DNA, not so much the DNA itself. And so the category there was that the products were genomic tests and not genetic tests. Genetics, I think most people are able to relate to, right? It's the DNA. But now what happens when those genes are at work in the body? And that becomes now genomic. And everybody was very confused. Like, why are we, calling this something different? Let's just call it, blood test, and so you had to stick with, no, let's own it, genomic. And now it's more standard. Most recently here, the other challenge we had was what I mentioned earlier. Our product is a liquid biopsy for infectious disease. Now, liquid biopsy, it's a new category, very new. And at the beginning, I was in a room with at least 30 of my colleagues presenting, this is what we're going to call ourselves. Well, the room, there's a lot of hesitation. No, nobody gets it. Please, we need to use something simpler. Why are we doing something that nobody understands? And so I've come to understand then and now And I see other examples that are beyond healthcare, like, for example, the Nike campaign on the athlete, right? Kirkpatrick, very controversial, that you have to have quite a bit of conviction in what you're doing. Somebody has to believe, somebody has to stand by the idea, right? And I think this is very relatable to all of us marketers. You have to stand by, I think this is going to work. Hey, it might not work all the time. I think we're wrong, but you have to have belief in what you're doing. And that's what I mean by conviction and grit, that everybody's going to take you down if you don't believe in what you're doing.
Yeah, so Colin Kaepernick, I think, was the Nike campaign, right? And that's
Yes.
I mean, that's really sticking their neck out there. But you bring up that good point, too. When you're selling a very new product, a lot of times first, before you even get into selling the product, you have to sell the category. And if it's new enough, you have to define the category. And to your point, I love what they were saying in the meeting. No one knows what this is. Well, of course they don't know what it is yet. We know it hasn't come out yet. We have to. That's the point of marketing, right? We need to be on the leading edge. And I know a lot of times marketing gets a bad rap for maybe forcing people and tricking them into buying things, but there's a big education component too. And I think what you're talking about there is that education component. And that gets into kind of our next lesson here. In the first half of the podcast, we talk about some lessons from the things you made. The second half of the podcast, we talk about lessons from the people you made them with. And this comes from Alec Ford, the CEO of Karius. You said you learned the power of the story and the importance of repetition. So when you're talking about something like that, like I said, that educational component of a new category and then your new product within that category, how does that importance of that story, getting that story right, and then as you said, repeating it? Because one thing I've learned is when you work for a brand, I mean, you live it, all day long, all week long, the weekends, you're thinking about it constantly. You're scrutinizing every message it has. And so, by the time that maybe customer sees it for the first time, you've seen it 72 times and you're like, I'm sick of this already, right? So how do you balance that? The power of the story and the importance of repetition.
Those two things make me realize that this is why I have a job. and my marketing team, we're like, everybody, this is why we have a job. It used to be, and I've heard this, you probably heard it and you know more about this. It used to be that it would take 7 instances, right, to really learn something or for something to stick with you. And then I heard later in other articles that it's now 77 based on the information that we're receiving. So I actually put that message out, and a lot of my decks, when I'm presenting here internally, it has that quote. It's now everybody probably times 10, 77 on repetition. I was very fortunate when our CEO, Alec Ford, joined our company. I was here before him, and he asked me, Laura, do people know what is the story? What are we doing? Do they understand the problem? And he's an amazing storyteller, and I learned a lot from him. He's like, look, the stories, they all begin with the bad guy, or like, what is the problem? Do you think our customers know what the problem is? Have you shared that with them? And then I started pulling the data, right? Asking customers, is there a problem here? Let's start there. And you know what? Daniel, I learned that most people didn't think there was a problem. And there was a huge problem in our space specifically. For example, in cancer patients, most people don't know that in certain cancers, half of the patients succumb to an infection versus the cancer itself. That's how big the problem is. 800 roughly patients every day are dying because of an infection and not to cancer. So it was then my job to actually start from there, the beginning. Let's ensure clinicians, patients, the company, us, my teams, understood that the problem here is bigger than everybody thought, and that is very real and it's happening all the time and every day. So that's where we started. So marketing then, my campaigns were not just about our great solutions and like we talked about the excitement of the technology and AI, but it was about that. it was, a year almost in messaging about the problem. And every time we went on air, every time we had the opportunity to write, even a brochure, we started with the problem. And it was really nice to see when the data came back that we, maybe not just us, right, but the industry had made a little bit of a dent in, yes, this current standard of care, taking care of the patients, there's opportunity for improvement. We can help. There's room for, products from Karius, from products from other companies. And so then the power of the storytelling and the repetition, right? This wasn't going to be happening after one email or one ad, then is what I saw and what I learned that made a difference, and the importance of telling the story.
Yeah, something that you said that really resonated with me there. I think a lot of companies, they make the mistake and they jump into messaging and value proposition to sell their company or their product. And we actually even created a whole, we call the value proposition decider infographic to understand what value proposition do you need to communicate at this point in the customer journey. And to your point, one of the, as we talked about earlier, is of the category. Another one is just of the problem. Right. And I really like what you said. I think everyone can learn from that is, hey, if we communicate about this problem and we really get it out there, other companies will benefit too. And that's okay. Right. I love that. That's okay. Karius is going to benefit. Other companies are going to benefit too. So you got to think about that. When you're out there messaging, again, especially we're talking about being pretty on the cutting edge here. It's not just, I will use another Larry Ellison quote just because you're there by Oracle. Not only must we succeed, but all others must be defeated, or whatever quote he said, quoting Genghis Khan. Right? If we're being new, hey, let's teach about the category. Let's teach about the problem. We're going to get good business out of that, and our competitors will as well. And hopefully, our customers will be helped by that. Which brings up, actually, this is a really good lesson for that. You say grit and resilience. So now I can see how that grit and resilience, a term I love, I try to teach my kids tenacity. I could see that has really paid off in your career. But I think you originally learned it. You mentioned one of the people you learned it from was Pamela Fetterman, who is your guardian. And this really gets into your personal life. So thank you for kind of opening the book and sharing about that. But you want to give us a bit about your background there and how you learned grit and resilience from Pamela?
Sure. And I have an 11-year-old that I agree with you. I'm trying to teach grit, but it's harder here, I think, than in other places, or at least the place I grew up in. So I grew up in El Salvador, Central America, third world country. And even though, I was lucky to be middle class, you still didn't know if you were going to have running water and electricity every day. It was my upbringing during the Civil War, so it was scary, right? There were bombs, there were kidnappings happening, people who you knew, right, who could be impacted. And so I think having that upbringing really gave me that grit you talked about, right? You had to problem solve almost every day. I don't know how I can translate that into my current 11-year-old. I mean, the phone gives her all the answers, right? She's like, Siri,
yeah.
Right? What's the weather for today? Even like coming across like having sufficient school supplies, right? So it is a challenge. But I was fortunate that as a teenager, then I moved to the country here, to California. My mom was a nanny, and unfortunately, she succumbed to cancer after only a couple of years of being here in the country with me, and I have a younger sister.
Sorry to hear that.
Yes. And Pamela, who you mentioned, she was the mom of a young boy, and my mom was a nanny for that young boy. What happened then is that after my mom passed away due to cancer, then Pamela just jumped in and she helped me and my sister by offering to be our parent. And she was extremely valuable in terms of mentorship about this. All that you need to do, girls, is do well in school. If you do well in school, you'll be fine. And that was beautiful for America. She was absolutely right. All we did was get good grades, and then guess what happened? Like the scholarships started coming in. It opened the doors for, attending top schools here in the United States. And that's, how I'm very grateful then, right? About having had that hard upbringing, but also very fortunate to have that mentorship and opportunity, by being in this country with so many resources and hard work being rewarded to, make a path forward here.
So has that experience, or how has that experience helped you to mentor your team? You mentioned you have a team of 12. Because, one thing I notice is in marketing, it's so deadline driven and so results driven, and it can be stressful, and especially in a startup culture, and you have younger people coming in, and, so many things can seem like the biggest crisis in the world. But, when you have experience under your belt, and some of that, that's an amazing story, and some of the experience you went through and grit and resilience you had to go through, it really helps to put things in perspective that, this campaign I'm running isn't getting the results I want, or, this missed a deadline, or our competitor beat us on this, or my stock options didn't vest the way I wanted. A million things that can go wrong. So have you been able to, that's a deep well of grit and resilience you're talking about, being through more things in life than many people probably have, just from your childhood in El Salvador, coming to America, your mother dying, being in a new country, and being able to get an education in neuroscience and being able to now be a successful marketing leader. So has that been something, what can we learn from that? How can we tap into that to mentor our teams that we manage when we come across difficulties in, our marketing campaigns or even in their lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, two things come to mind as to how that has translated into my career, right? My upbringing, and how I hope that I'm transferring this to the teams who work for me and other people who I work with. The first thing is this passion and this really genuine belief that what we're doing is making a difference. And what is that gets you going, right? So I believe that everybody in my company, for example, is really passionate and dedicating to making sure that these patients get the best care, right? It's about trying with these clinicians to save their lives. Because I've experienced that firsthand. That's what the experience with my mom gave me. I've been doing healthcare since, I got out of school. So that's what I hope we hire, right? I look for that. I look for that conviction of not just this is, something I do and it ends at 5:00 and now I go home. So I think that's very important, that element. The second element here, in terms of resilience, is that, and then I think people who I work with will tell you, I think the default is that nothing would happen. I think that there's just like a mountain of problems. Even if you want to get like a brochure out, or, however simple this project might be, I think that it just looks almost impossible. In healthcare, it's extra difficult. Are we going to get the right wording? Is this going to take us 6 months, right? Is the color right? Look, we can spend, all of us, like an endless amount of time trying to get something. And when you work in the industry you're so focused on getting it right. And I know there's another podcast there you have about, doing the right thing versus getting it right, or something like that. So it's super then important that we have the ability to problem solve every day, not just big problems, but also prioritize, like, what? Maybe that color actually doesn't matter, right? Let's focus on what matters, or let's get this out. It's good enough, and the reward is helping more patients versus getting it 100% right. So I found that those two things, right, is what are very important in terms of translating this into like the workplace or the everyday.
I like that you say the default is nothing's going to happen, right? 'Cause that's, it's so true. We forget about that. It's like, I'm no scientist, but in physics, right, it's basically like that which is at rest tends to stay at rest. We have to put it in motion. It's not going to happen unless there's that grit and resilience and tenacity, and we push it over the finish line and make it happen. So yes, I totally agree. Let's look at one more lesson here. Understand your customer and how to deliver your message effectively. And you learned this from Savan Berchovi, the CTO of Karius. So how did you learn this from Savan?
Yeah, another element of marketing here is, and I think we all are very familiar, is where is this message best delivered to our customer, Is it going to be on that commute driving, right? Like maybe for this podcast, or is it going to be reading, a magazine that is relevant to the topic? And so one of those things that I learned about communication, right, it's not just what you say and how you say it, but where are you saying it? And Sivan with his team, they were very instrumental in bringing in a mobile app to Karius. And at the beginning, everybody was hesitant. Like, why do we need a mobile app for these doctors, right? Most of the information is already being delivered, via these portals at the hospitals. And, right, we have, I think, what we need. But they really pushed through. And now that we have this mobile app that delivers results as fast as possible to these clinicians, it's like, duh, why didn't we think about this before? Our doctors are at the hospital, they're running around. Guess where they want the results? As quickly as possible, in their pocket, on their hand. How's my patient doing? That's where we can find them. And even though this is not a marketing per se tool, right? It is about the delivery of the message. If there's anything important, because I also work on customer success, right? I'm making sure that we have these data available to them was sort of the best channel. And that's what I learned from them also.
Well, what tactics have you used in your career to learn about what message you should deliver and where you should deliver it? I've written about this before. We talked about experimentation briefly. Some companies A/B testing, actually talking to customers, doing surveys. There's so many different ways we can learn about. What tactics do you use to learn about your customer so you deliver it into the way they want it and you say it in a way they understand it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I never go out without testing by, even if I don't have access immediate to an actual customer, by who's the closest to that experience and customer. In my case, it's going to be, we have doctors here on site who have patients still. And so I work with them. Does this make sense? Right? So I would think that's essential. I also, like we talked about, experiment, right? And that I could do it with longer term aspirations. But sometimes you're right. Like you don't have time for that. So I search for that person who might be closer to the experience. And also after a while, I have learned to trust also my instincts. I might not trust them like day 3 on the job, but year 3, after talking to hundreds of customers, you do start acquiring that language. You've read enough, you've talked to a lot of people, you kind of know which words are gonna land and which ones are not. So a shorthand for not being somewhere for 3 years is that person who's doing this every day.
And, from that, I think we've talked around this topic a lot, but I want to kind of address it directly. Like, when you do the messaging, what have you learned about balancing the rational and the emotional? So we have, for example, a free marketing class, and in fast class number 19 of the free marketing course, Flint McLaughlin teaches, refine your value prop until it becomes a reason, the summation of a rational, emotional argument. And I really thought of that when I was reading through your entire podcast guest application and thinking about healthcare marketing. When it comes to messaging to physicians, which is your primary market, I think, how do you balance that rational, emotional? Yes, the physicians are very rational because, they're very evidence-based and data and based on their training, but it also has to be emotional to be there directly with cancer patients and informing loved ones that, someone has died or is sick. So how do you balance that rational, emotional? What have you learned from that research you've done so far?
Yeah, I think that's the secret sauce, Daniel, for all of us. Well, from my experience, I think that where I'm landing is the channel and the format of communications. So in an ad, what's going to stick the most? On your homepage, it's going to be visuals, and it's going to be probably 3 words. And so the goal of communication varies depending on your channel. And at the end of the day, that being telling everybody everything, but not at once. So what I try to do then is, let's start from the highest level of the message. What is the 1 or 2 things that really matter, right? Let's take my example. Is this product that avoids these invasive procedures. Okay, we'll stick that up there first. Use effective visuals, right? And then in other channels like a white paper or, you know, a 5-page document, then be more thorough. So do a multi-communication approach. Don't think one thing is gonna be enough. Don't promote, you know, your 5-page document everywhere. That's gonna get you very little. So I try to then be thoughtful about the consumption of the information, and probably at the beginning, if it's very new, do a lot more on those visuals, right? And that high level message. And then later I get more in depth. You know, I was just talking about this week with the teams here. For a new product, new category, we started with a high level awareness. Do people even know what we are, who we are? And this takes time, Daniel. I'm just looking at the data and I'm seeing, you know what, after a year, after 2 years, now let's go deeper.
That makes sense. I mean, you need to open people up before then you can kind of go in there with a lot of that more.
Yes. And the brand, sense. Right, is also super important. What is the brand identity that I care about communicating? And in my case, it's going to be trust. I know a lot of people here put a lot of work and due diligence in making sure this product works. And that's, you know, my job to help communicate that externally.
Absolutely. Well, that's your job. It takes many things to do that. So let's ask now, we've talked about many different things that it means to be a marketer, from the grit and resilience, you know, to the empathy and many different things. So what are the key qualities of an effective marketer, if you had to break it down?
Yes. So first, and I know everybody says this, right, is understanding your customer. But what I hope I provided here is the next level of that. Does the customer understand itself? Does the customer understand that problem also that you're addressing? So I think that's very important in a marketer. The second thing I'm going to say is that conviction that we talked about, right? That somebody has to believe in what you're going to deliver. And then the third element is differentiation. So Seth Godin, I read his books and I'm a big fan. The purple cow concept, right? There's a lot of cows out there. Is yours really purple? Because no matter how good your storyline is and no matter how strong your conviction, if you're not able, again, like we talked about, break through that like massive amount of information, then nobody's gonna hear and read about you.
Yeah, I think the Seth Godin concept, right? If you're driving down the countryside, you see all these cows. Well, you don't really notice. If you're driving down the countryside, you see all these cows, and one of them's purple. Well, that you're going to remember, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for sharing everything from your life, from your early childhood to everything you've learned in your biotech healthcare marketing career. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.